May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. So when Paul asked me to preach this week, I think Paul's tired of preaching. I don't know. He preached a lot recently. They were all great. Good job, Paul. But when I told my husband that I was going to preach on the wise men, he goes, "Hey, Jesus, give me some frankincense and myrrh." And I go, "What?" And he goes, "The wise guys, the three wise guys." We've been watching lots of Sopranos, so we had that on our minds. But yes, today I take the wise men, the journey of the wise men, the gospel that we just heard as my text. And specifically, I take the very, very, very end of that text. That is, that after the wise men encountered Jesus, they had to return home a different way. And of course, there are lots of political implications with this, right? Herod wanted to maintain power, and this baby being born into the world was kind of changing all of that. But more than that, often we must go back to where we're familiar a different way. And that's really true right after big events. We know after 2 years turning into the third year of this pandemic that life will be different for us now. That we will go a different way moving forward. And that happens with any big life event, right? In my family, and I thank you all so much. You've been praying for us for several weeks now. We just lost my husband's uncle, Tom. He's in the prayers. And Tom was such a big part of our Christmas celebrations that this Christmas and all following Christmases will just be different. Our lives moving forward will go a different way. And that happens with any big event in our life. That also happens when we encounter Christ. Now, encountering Christ can happen a lot of different ways, right? Sometimes it is that big mountaintop experience. A priest friend of mine always describes his big mountaintop experience. When he was a high schooler, he traveled with his parents to, I think, Colorado or somewhere, and he went hiking off by himself and really had this big emotional experience where he met God. Sometimes it's like that for us, these big pivotal moments in our life where we just really feel the presence of Christ. But oftentimes that encountering of Christ is so much more subtle, right? It's the smile when we're having a really bad day and just a stranger smiles at us. Or sitting next to a loved one at a funeral, and that loved one reaches out and puts their hand on your lap. So however you encounter Christ or have encountered Christ, there's no doubt that you may have noticed it. Hopefully you've noticed it, even if it is a subtle way. When I was younger, I thought that these encounters with Christ needed to be like that mountaintop experience. Something huge, something life-changing. So, when I was in 7th grade and starting to really live into my Christian faith, I got saved. Twice. The first time I got saved, it was, so I grew up Presbyterian, and very, very mainline Presbyterian, pretty conservative, and not a lot of stained glass or anything in our church. It was really kind of chill and easy. But at summer camp, every summer, our youth group would travel to a summer camp. And this summer camp was Presbyterian, but really leaned a lot more evangelical / Southern Baptist, whatever you call it. So during summer camp, we traveled to Tennessee, to this little college, King's College, tiny, tiny little college in Bristol, Tennessee. There's a racetrack there, too, if you're a race fan. But we got there and we were getting out of our church van, and they immediately squirted us with squirt guns, and there were all these bouncy castles and sumo wrestler things, and just, it was like a middle schooler's paradise. It was so much fun. And all week it was like that. We had scavenger hunts and 3-on-3 basketball tournaments, and it was just like fun thing after fun thing. And on the second to last night, we had worship service every night, and it was usually just kind of a normal kind of evangelical worship service. So lots of singing, guitars. But the second to last night, Thursday night, you could tell this service was a little different. The lights were lower. The music was more special. The preacher was like really on that night. And at the end of the service, they invited anybody that felt called or compelled to come forward and give your life to Christ. So little 7th grade Stacy was like, this is it. This is such a fun time. I want to be with these people all the time. Christians are really fun and really cool. So that last night, I went up and I got saved. And not to detract from the experience, yes, it might have been the squirt guns and the bouncy castles that kind of encouraged me to join this group. But ultimately, it was a very emotional experience when I turned my life over to Christ. And I thought after that, life would be totally different. Everything would be totally different when I went home. And I went home, and it really wasn't. Everything was kind of the same. Now, I was reading the Bible a little bit more diligently and studying a bit more, and I made sure we were trying to go to church every Sunday, but overall, life was kind of the same. So then 6 months after that, I went with my friend to one of her church, which was one of the mega churches in Cincinnati. It's still, if you go down 7175 in Florence, it's that giant, giant church at one of the Florence exits. And it was a Wednesday night, and they had youth group on Wednesday night, and we went in there, and oh, so cool. They had a rock band and a rock wall, and like, just the coolest thing. They had a service again, and at the end of the service, they said, anybody that wants to get saved, turn their life over to Christ, come on up. So I thought, all right, I'll try it again. Maybe the first time just didn't work right. Maybe I'll just do it again. So I went up, and I got saved again for the second time. And once again, life was kind of the same, which was really disappointing to young Stacy, who really bought the idea of this really big conversion moment. Everything was different in my life. But it wasn't. And now as an adult, my maturity has led me to realize that everything was different. It's not as sudden as we'd like it to be. It's not as 180 turning around. Sometimes, of course, those experiences do happen. People do have that moment where their whole life is different, they make that commitment, everything is different. But for most of us, it comes in a really subtle way. Just like us experiencing Christ, it's often a lot more subtle. Our transformation is much more subtle. And so, as we are entering into the land of resolutions this January, I'd invite you to remember that those resolutions don't have to be a 180 either. That all of our lives with Christ, that all of our transformational moments in our life, yes, we can make that quick decision, but often the implementation, there we go. Often the implementation of those resolutions, of that turning to Christ, often it's slow, it's gradual, it happens over time. So in my daily life, I'm a professional singer. And about 10 years ago, when I was working with one of Cincinnati's professional choirs, and we were preparing for a Christmas concert, our conductor at that time, he's now retired and moved on to somewhere else, but our conductor at that time was a very austere, serious man. And we're preparing this really happy kind of Christmas concert. And he says to us, when I think of the birth of Christ, I think of the cross. We were like, what? That's so intense. That's so dark. Why do you, I mean, like, Christmas is about the birth of a baby, not the cross. That's later. That's Easter. And now, as an adult looking back, I realize he was right. Right in the way that with new life, the birth of Christ, we are also offered the resurrection. And so, every day, we are offered that resurrection. Every moment of every day, we are offered that resurrection moment. That yes, even at Christmas, when we are happy and celebrating the birth of a baby, we know what's coming. And what is coming for all of us is the opportunity to try again. The opportunity to have those big moments that lead to subtle changes in our life. And so we'll hear Ben sing soon about how the wise men brought gold, but that wasn't quite enough. What Jesus really wants from us is our hearts. And not to knock the whole evangelical being saved thing, I do think it's a really beautiful thing, a really beautiful moment that people can have. But it's not a one-time thing. Once we make that decision to follow Christ, it is a daily thing. It is a moment-by-moment thing that we must choose over and over again, and when we fail, we get to try again. And that, for me, is the point of this all. It's that no matter what happens in my life, no matter how dark things get, no matter how much of a sinner I am, there is always new life. There is always the resurrection. And there is always the opportunity to choose another way. Amen.